Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters from quiltingismytherapy.com, and welcome to the last video in the Hello Spring video series. Throughout these 4 videos, we've been learning some spring-inspired designs and creating some pretty amazing projects. If you haven't caught any of those previous videos, be sure to do that, because in this video, we're gonna take that mini panel that we quilted in the previous one and turn it into some amazing projects. Not only are these projects fun and easy to make, they're the perfect way to use our quilted fabric. Now, like I said, in the previous video, I quilted that mini Hello Spring panel. And this mini panel is the perfect size for table runners, wall hangings, or even some pillows. But if you already have enough of those laying around, we're gonna see how we can cut this up and create some fabric buckets and even a supply roll-up. So I'm gonna grab my quilted piece and get to it. First, let's turn our quilted panel into some functional storage baskets. Not only are these cuties perfect for storing your favorite little things, they look great on your shelves. Plus, once you get the idea of how it goes together, it's super easy to customize it to make different sizes. For ours today, we're gonna start by cutting our panel into 2 pieces that are the same size. And the size of those pieces will determine how big or little your basket is. For today, I'm gonna cut it into 2 pieces, 10 inches by 14 inches. When I look at my panel, if I wanted to, I could cut it in multiple sections to have multiple baskets. But what I'm gonna do here is kind of cut right out of the center because I wanna get as much of this detail as possible. When it comes to actually cutting into the panel, it doesn't really ever get easier. I'm always like, oh, here we go. I'm gonna set this piece aside for now because this will be our little supply roll-up that we'll make later on in the video. I'm also gonna need 2 pieces of lining fabric that's the same size as the quilted pieces. Then, before I start assembling them, I'm gonna cut the notches out of the corners. These notches are what will give it that boxy kind of shape. The size of the squares that I cut out here are gonna determine just how deep the basket is, so you can adjust these as necessary. For these, I'm gonna cut them out at 2 inches. I'm gonna position the ruler in the corner, line up that 2-inch mark right here, and mark a line, and then cut that out. I'm gonna do the same on the other side. Once I have that piece all cut out on the bottom, I'm gonna repeat with the remaining pieces. And once that's finished, I'll have 2 lining pieces and 2 quilted pieces that look exactly the same. Now, all that's left is the assembly. I'm gonna start by grabbing 1 lining piece and 1 quilted piece. Place my lining piece right on top, and I'm gonna sew a seam right across here. If you wanna make sure that it doesn't slip around on you, you could use some of these Wonder Clips to help hold that in place. Until I have something that looks like this. Now I'm gonna press this and do the same with the other pieces. Now that those are finished, I'm gonna put one of them right side down on the other, lining up those edges. I mean, this is so fast and fun. Like, it's a perfect gift, housewarming gift, perfect baby shower gift. I mean, who wouldn't love a fabric basket? And then once I have those lined up, I'm gonna sew down the sides. I'm also gonna sew along the bottom. Now up here, I'm gonna do the same thing, except I'm gonna leave a gap right here so I can turn it inside out. Again, using clips to help hold those pieces in place if you'd like, and sewing them together. Then I'm gonna do the same on the shorter edge of the quilted pieces. Then I'm gonna sew these 2 pieces together, remembering to leave a gap in the middle. What I love about this is at this point, it's not really looking like much of anything, but it's gonna start coming together really, really fast. So again, I just wanna recap, I've sewed the sides together, sewed the bottom, sewed the top, except I left a gap right here so we can turn it inside out. Now I need to box these corners. To do that, I'm simply going to grab one of those corners, and I'm gonna pull the edges together until it makes a straight line. Then I'm gonna take it to my sewing machine and sew it together. Until I have something that looks like this. And I'm gonna repeat that with all 4 corners, pulling them together and sewing those seams. I'm just looking to make sure these 2 seams are lined up, it's kind of nice and straight, and then sewing them together. And then once I'm done with the quilted pieces, I'm gonna do the same with the lining. And once that's done, it's time for the big reveal. I'm going to put my hand in that little gap and pull it through. And then before I get much further, I'm going to close up that gap by just pulling the sides in together and sewing a quick seam. Once that's done, I'm finished. All I have to do is tuck that lining into my bucket, poke out those sides, make sure it's nice and flat. Sometimes easier said than done. And check out that cute little basket. I love how it's showing off the quilting while being a functional yet gorgeous part of our decor. And if you want a slightly different look, you can fold this edge down to make it look like that. I swear, these things are so addicting. Once you make one, you gotta make several. Well, now that we've seen how to create some cute little fabric baskets with our panel, let's see how we can turn the remaining piece into a supply roll-up. The supply roll-up is actually a project adapted from a book I wrote with my daughter, Chloe. It's crazy to think that when we wrote this book, she was 8 years old and now she just turned 21. Time just flies. And since it was a project in a kid's quilting book, you can be sure that it's gonna be fast and fun to make. First up, I'm gonna cut my quilted fabric into a rectangle that's 9 inches by 18 inches. I'm also gonna need a piece of fabric that's 6 inches by 18 inches. That's gonna hold our supplies in place. A 3.5 by 24 inch strip to act as our little tie up. And then a couple strips for binding if you wanna bind the outside of it. So now that I have all those pieces gathered, it's time to start assembling it. First, I'm gonna take that strip of fabric and iron down one side of it, about 1/4 inch or so. Then I'm gonna take it to my sewing machine and sew it down. This is gonna give it that finished look. Once I have that finished, I'm gonna take my quilted piece and turn it over like this. This is actually gonna be the inside of my supply roll-up, and this will be the outside. I'm gonna take that piece that I just sewed and lay it right on top of that. It's gonna be right side up with the inside of that seam poked towards the inside, lining up those edges. Then a quick clip into place so I can sew them together. This is just gonna keep that piece of fabric from sliding around as I sew through all these layers. Chloe and I originally made this as a way to store like her art supplies, but you can also use it for other things like painting supplies, makeup brushes, really anything that you want to keep track of in a nice handy roll. Once that's in place, I'm going to sew along the edge of that piece to hold it down. Now I'm sewing this about 1/8 inch away from the edge. It's more like a basting stitch. Eventually I'm going to come back and put binding all the way around it. That's going to help secure that in place. And now that I have that sewn on, you can see how it's starting to come together. Now I'm gonna add some lines of stitching in here to divide this up into little sections. The size you divide the sections up to really just depend on what supplies you're putting in here. I'm gonna make one a little larger so it could be for a notepad, and then several smaller ones for pencils. So starting over from one side, I'm gonna stitch a line through all the layers, about 5 inches or so away, and then add some more lines working my way down that area. Really, there's no wrong way to do this. You can divide this up in any way that you want. And then once I reach that finished edge, I'm gonna backstitch a little bit just to help secure it. I'm using a cream colored thread for this, but if you wanted to really make it stand out, you could use a contrasting thread color. I think that would look amazing. Now I'm just eyeballing these lines as I sew them. Of course, if you wanted to make it more perfect, you could mark those out before you start. And I'm just using a good old straight stitch to sew these lines, but if you wanna get fancy with it, you could use decorative stitches if your machine comes with those. Well, now that I have all my lines sewn in, I have a perfect place for a couple of notebooks, a couple of pencil spots. It's gonna be just perfect. Now, in the book that I wrote with Chloe, I gave the option where you could just zigzag stitch around the outside. The idea being that if a kid was actually making this project, they're probably not gonna wanna bind. And who am I kidding, a kid or an adult like myself? But I'm gonna go ahead and bind this to give it a finished look. I'm gonna take my binding strips and then iron them in half like this. I've cut these out at 2.5 inches, but you might do them a little smaller. Then I'm gonna iron them again, folding them in on each side like this. And then with one last iron, iron it in half. This is different than I normally do binding, but I like how I can make my way around the whole thing in one pass. So here we can see the strip that I've already done. It's ironed in half again. I'm basically just gonna tuck that along my quilted piece and sew it down. I'm not gonna stitch the very first part down because I wanna leave it loose so I can tuck the other end into it when I get there. So I'm gonna start down a couple inches away from that. Once I get to the corner, I'm gonna stop about 1/4 inch away from the edge so I can wrap that around the next side. I'm basically just gonna open up that binding, kind of pinch it around that corner, and then continue sewing. Of course, if you already have a preferred binding technique, you could definitely use that. Then I'm gonna keep doing that, working my way around the whole piece. And then once I approach my starting point, you can see I have my two ends loose right here. I'm gonna pull that first one back, take that second one and put it in place, and then fold the other piece right on top of it. If you wanted to, you could fold this piece under to give it a finished edge, but I figure I'm not making a show quilt. I'm making a fun little supply roll-up, so it's good enough. And now that that's finished, it's practically done. We just need to sew on the strap. So grabbing that longer piece that I saw earlier, I'm gonna do the same exact thing I did with the binding, ironing it in half, and then in half again, and then folding it on top of each other to give me that nice kind of finished edge, which I've already made the piece right here. So it's been folded in half a couple times. I have my folded edge. I stitched a line right along this edge right here just to help hold it together. And then just because I wanted to make it look a little bit more finished, I folded that over and sewed it down. I'm gonna take that strip and I'm gonna fold it probably about a third of the way down. I want one side longer than the other. Then I'm gonna flip it around so that the longer edge is running along that quilted fabric. And then I'm gonna stitch it in place right here, right along the binding. And to make sure that strap stays in place where it needs to, I'm gonna backstitch over it a couple times just to give it a little bit more stability. And believe it or not, that's it. This supply roll-up is finished. All that's left to do is to add all my goodies on the inside. Then, once it's all full, I can simply roll it up and tie it in place. I know I've already said it before, but this is so cute and so fast to make. And it makes like the perfect gift. You can give it to teachers, to kids, to other quilters, or heck, just keep it for yourself. Creating quilted projects is a lot of fun to add a touch of love to your house. So whether you leave that mini wall hanging just as it is, or turn into a project like fabric buckets or a supply roll-up, it's gonna be a great way to sit back and admire your beautiful quilting. Well, this concludes the 4-part Hello Spring video series. I hope you've enjoyed creating with me along these videos. But even though this is the end of this video series, I'll be back soon with more videos and tutorials. Until then, everybody, happy quilting.